So you guys are, I think, in my experience, I think that you guys are the true heroes of the sports industry because you're behind the scenes and your stories go unspoken a lot of the time. So tell us a little bit about yourselves, what you do, and who you are.
Well, my name is Morgan Shaw Parker, and I'm the Vice President of Brand Strategy for the Atlanta Falcons and Mercedes-Benz Stadium. What that means is a combination of about 55 different people. I think the median age of my group is about 26, old enough to be their mother for the most part, but a really interesting group combining football communications, brand communications, digital media, marketing, creative services, video content. It's basically all of the storytellers in one house.
My name is Jim Cavale, and I'm the founder and CEO of Influencer. We're a software company actually based just up the road in Birmingham, Alabama, and we serve big-time college athletics brands with our software. Schools like Auburn and Kansas, Kentucky, Baylor, North Carolina, Duke. These schools create massive amounts of content every day for their teams, and we give them a place in the cloud to store it, and then our system uses artificial intelligence, facial recognition, to put it into personalized galleries that live on all the phones of the athletes, coaches, alums of these schools so that they can tell their story on social media, on their Instagram, on their Twitter, on their Snapchat. And then we track for the client, the team, how many millions of people they're now reaching in a partnership with their athletes and these other brand ambassadors. So it's really exciting to be here, and like Morgan was talking about, we share the passion for storytelling, which is really why Influencer exists.
Awesome. My name is Susan Shaw. I'm the Director of Athletics Communication and Strategies at the University of Mobile, about 20 minutes north of here.
And I am Terrance DeShaun. I'm the Director of the Mayor's Innovation Team, directly across the street.
Directly across the street. All right, well, not all of us can walk.
All right. So before we get too far into how you guys build teams and how you use social media, let's talk a little bit about your first job. What did you learn from that job that you still use today?
Oh, my first job. I wish I could tell you something lofty. I've been with the Falcons for about 3 years. I've been with Nike for about 11 years, both on the brand side and the spokesperson side. I've been at the Kansas City Chiefs and a couple of different agencies, but my very first job was working for the cookie company. I think I was probably 17 years old, and I think the lesson I took was, don't eat the cookie dough. Quite a few other lessons, but that was the first.
Yeah, for me, it was really in college. While I was a student athlete, I had this vision to help my parents up in New York. I played college baseball here in Alabama, but I'm from upstate New York, and I wanted my parents to hear our games because they weren't on the radio up there. And so we started a streaming network for the school, and I thought that students would really want to come work, and do it, but recruiting students was very difficult, and it taught me a lot because I realized that you need to create a vision that excites people to get other people to want to be around it. And for a long time, it was just me. But eventually, I figured out how to hone in my vision and get other students involved. And we did over 100 broadcasts that first year. So it was exciting, but it was also a lot of long nights where I couldn't be a college kid.
And that was your first job?
That was my first job because I was always an athlete growing up. So I didn't really have a job except for play sports on every travel team and get to college so I could get a scholarship.
I think one of the most important lessons that I ever learned was when I went from the Kansas City Chiefs as a lower level manager. Loved what I did, but I got an amazing opportunity to work with Nike. And first day on the job, I came out of the NFL and I thought, man, I know everything. I got this. I understand brand. I know about communications. I've got this. I'm going to tell them what I know. And I think I was all of about 23 at the time. And I realized really quickly that I needed to be more quick to listen and slow to speak. And I think that's carried me through my entire career. There's a lot of people out there that have a vast amount of experience. Whether there's someone that I agree with or not, I think what's most important is to take a step back and be a little bit more quick to listen and slow to provide your input. But once you do, you can make sure you're measured and you get your point across as well.
I think that speaks so well to your character and personal brand, and though I might be a little biased, I think it shines through. And obviously, Jim, I've seen yours as well over the last couple days and gotten to know you a little bit more. Let's dive into that. What does brand mean to you? How do you define brand? What does that look like? I feel like this is just such an elephant in the room sometimes, and people use it and maybe even overuse it sometimes to define so many different aspects of business or education or conversation, and maybe even just who they are. What's it mean to you?
Well, I think, first off, it is sometimes overused, but there is a reality that's shining more and more true in that we're all really brands. And so even if you're building a company, which is a type of brand, the company is made up of people who represent that company, which are a bunch of personal brands. And this has really been personified by social media, because on social, people do follow brands, but they tend to follow people more. And so all the people associated with one business represent it. And I define brand really with three things. There's your message, there's your media, and there's your market. And so your message is what you're about. And as a person, as a company, what are you about? What is really your MO? And your media is the how to get to your market, which is the who. The who is the people who you have relationships with offline in places like this, or who follow you online on your social medias. And so just thinking about brand is what, how, who, and knowing that your what, your message needs to resonate with your market. If you have a message that doesn't resonate with your market, I tell athletes this all the time. You want to be like your friends on social media, but the reality is you can't just be a kid on social. You have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who are just fans, who might be older than you, who might be in a different place in life than you, and your message needs to resonate with them. You can't freestyle rap with profanity on social media and think it's going to resonate with your followers. So it's an important thing.
Do we get a demo of that?
Well, no demo.
Okay.
But just think about that as a brand. Your what should really connect to the who that you're relating to offline or online.
So for me, I think your brand is really your identity. Whether you're a company, whether you're an individual, it's your story. But what I think also is that there's a real fine line between what you think your truth is and what others' perception of your truth is. And I think it's really important, and where that pendulum swings is reality. Perception becomes reality. And I think especially in this day and age where social media is so prevalent, you think about millennials, and we'll probably talk about that in a little bit, but every single person age 18 and younger, but 18 to 34 has grown up with a device in their hand. And I think it's so important. And what Jim talks about is your personal brand. Every single touch point is a brand moment of truth. And that's something that our president tells us a lot, and our owner as well. A funny story, but a real one. We were in the press box, and I won't name the NFL team, but we're sitting in the press box. We actually won that game this year, so I'm really excited about that from a Falcons perspective. We're sitting in the press box, and a group of high-level national media were talking about the food in the press box. I thought, man, what could be so great about this food? Well, when I got closer, I realized it was how bad the food was. And they were talking about this terrible tray of meatloaf. And sure enough, I went up and looked at the tray of meatloaf, and it was awful. Never seen anything like it. Well, I have. It's probably somewhere buried in the backyard. But what was really important about that, and why I tell that story to my teams, is because every single moment is a brand moment of truth. You've got 300 of the most influential national and local media for that NFL team in that city there in that room, and what they chose to feed them was something that wasn't great. And unfortunately, that became the banter back and forth on social media. Something so disconnected, something so simple, and something no one paid attention to ultimately became their brand in that moment for a short period of time. Something people will probably remember when they come back to that stadium too. So it's really interesting. Everything connects.
All right, so as I look over the crowd, I see so many different types of people: entrepreneurs, real estate agents, educators, social service providers, government officials. How important is it to cultivate a personal brand online, and how often should we monitor that personal brand online?
Well, I think when you think about your personal brand, it's not that it has to have this enormous following that's going to impress people. It's more about connecting this what and who that I talked about earlier, and realizing that social media has really created a place where your character is tangible, and people will literally go look on social media before a job interview. Morgan reached out to me before this event to just connect and talk about this panel. And where did she reach out to me? On social. And what did she do? Probably either before or after she reached out, she looked through some of the stuff I've posted and who I am on LinkedIn. And I did the same for Morgan, right? Like, that's why we're on there and have that presence. So being intentional about telling your story to the extent that you want. You may want to involve your family. You may not want to involve your family. You may be passionate about style, music, entertainment. You may not. But these different things outside of just who you are as a professional and make you who you are, the more you can tell that story on social and have a personal brand that just portrays who you really are, which, let's be honest, not everybody's great at talking about who they are, just the positive stuff a lot of times on social. But that is so important because for me, we're a young business. We're 16 months old, but we're building a team fast. We're going to be at 21 people at the end of our second year. And so I use social a lot to really see who I'm going to be interviewing when they come in. And at the same time, you see that with relationships outside of employment. So I think it's real important to think about your character is tangible on social media, whether it's good or it's bad.
Building your personal brand is just as important as anything in life. Social media, instant access, 24/7, all the time, and it's always there. No matter what you do, no matter how you act, no matter what you post, you might erase it, but it doesn't go away. You might think you hid it, you might think certain people see it, but it doesn't go away, and others can find it. I think it's incredibly important from a personal perspective and a brand perspective to cultivate that personal characteristic, that personal brand. But I do think that it needs to be thoughtful. You need to take the time. You need to understand who you are and what you want to portray. And like Jim said, you don't have to post your entire personal story. In fact, I would think twice before you do that, unless you want everybody chiming in and everybody seeing that. So I agree.
And to your point, I think being intentional, she said that, I think that's the number one thing you've got to think about with social media. You can't just post things to post things. Mm-hmm. You've heard of Twitter fingers before. We see them a lot from all kinds of different people, including the top of the country, right? So, that's a reality. And you have to have a filter and you have to have intention. And that's why I go back to think about what your message really is as a person. What are you about? And think about who you want it to resonate with.
Think about one of the most interesting exercises we did as a team, and of the 55 folks on my team, they all evaluated each other, tried to be non-biased just on social media. How would you describe this person if all you knew was only on social media? And it was really fascinating because what those perceived truths were not what the person actually wanted to come across. Some of it was pretty in line, but it was a very different perspective for those evaluating. So I think it's really important to be intentional about it.
It's one of the questions we wanted to talk to you about a little bit and to dive into that today was, what's the feedback that was given and how was that given and what are the best maybe lessons learned and feedback and ways to give feedback to your teams. And I think that looking at the crowd and seeing educators and seeing business owners and teammates and go Rams, but some athletes back there too, what's the best way across any industry in any team, even if it's your home team, meaning your immediate family, how do you give that feedback? And how do you speak into somebody else's personal brand to help them better themselves?
Constructive feedback is really important. I think there's two things, the person giving the feedback and the person receiving the feedback. I think one of the biggest growth opportunities for me coming up was really being able to receive constructive criticism with grace. And as a young person who thought she knew everything at age 17, age 23, it's really, really hard to receive constructive criticism. But I find the most valuable times throughout my career were when somebody took the time to sit me down and say, Morgan, think about this differently. Look at it from this perspective. Did you take into consideration who you're trying to speak to? Or, hey, you shouldn't wear that tomorrow. That was more coming from Susan.
Keep in mind, I
What
stole
sisters are for,
her
right?
clothes out of her closet.
It's the ultimate moment of truth. What do you think, Jim?
I think that self-awareness, having an environment where self-awareness is the number one goal for everyone, And candor, radical candor, is actually the norm, is an environment where the organization's gonna win and every individual's gonna win. The one-off conversations after the meeting when everyone's in the room between two people are what kill an organization, and the person that the two people are talking about in that one-off conversation is hurting the person they're talking about because they don't realize what's being said, right? So creating this environment of candor where self-awareness is actually the goal, and hearing another person's perspective on something you've done is actually a desire, and questions are being asked by people to others to get better, that is a really great environment. Now, it's easier said than done, right? I always used to joke, because I'm from up north, when I came down south, everybody said, people can be very rude in the Northeast. And I said, well, sometimes they can, but sometimes they're just telling you the truth. And down south, I learned that, there's a different way of dealing with the truth, and it's usually like, really nice to my face, but then later I heard, they were saying this and that about, right? So changing that as the leader of your organization by welcoming the feedback for yourself through collaborative things like offsites, through making decisions as a group, through asking for feedback, through reviews that are 360, these things all model an environment that can become all about self-awareness. And I just had my Q4 offsite with my leadership team, and I may have went a little too far with it. I got beat up pretty good by my team, but some of the thing I got out of that totally changed how I scheduled my first quarter, as far as how much I'm away and not in the office with my team. I moved into a new building out of our office because of the things I learned. And it also drove some of the hiring decisions I'm making this quarter. And without hearing some of the feedback that was tough to hear at first, but as time went on, interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. Those perspectives help me make decisions that I wouldn't be able to make by myself. So I think that two-way street and self-awareness being the number one goal in your organization is huge for everyone involved.
All right, so we talked a little bit about radical candor, but let's back up and figure out how we get to a place of radical candor. So I come from the world of education and social services, and we talk a lot about school climate and school culture. But last night, I think I became a lot more smarter talking to Dr. Brennan, who will be here later, and he said, Terrance, in the business world, culture eats structure for breakfast. Yeah, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about culture and structure.
Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's hard to understand. I mean, to this day, like, culture is still, when I first say it, seems so abstract. But when you dive in and you look at the whole idea of emotional intelligence, right, which is made up of things like empathy, self-regulation, self-awareness, these components that are a lot of times overlooked, or people will say, well, you're born with that. No, you can learn empathy. I mean, you could teach me empathy right now by bringing me to a place that I've never been, and I would develop compassion for that place, and I could probably teach you empathy by doing the same thing, right? We could all have more empathy for each other. So these skills and creating an environment where emotional intelligence is actually part of this whole self-awareness goal I'm talking about is important, but you also have to start with bringing in the right people. See, culture is made up of people. And if you don't have a hiring process that has intention to guard your culture, since it does eat strategy for breakfast, then one bad hire, we've all seen this happen, can become a cancer that eats your culture for breakfast. And that can be detrimental to your business. It not only can cost a lot of money to let that person go and then hire a new person, but it can hurt your organization by forcing people to want to leave. And so Morgan and I talked a little bit about this last night, but just having a process where your values, which is the character of your organization, are defined and used in the interviewing process. They're not just written on the wall. Wiring is assessed up front, because let's face it, a guy that runs a 5'2", 40, is 300 pounds and 6 foot tall should not play wide receiver for an NFL team. And just like his wiring isn't right for wide receiver, is the person you're hiring for your new CFO job or your new sales job really have the right wiring? I use Culture Index. I've used them all, Myers-Briggs, DISC, Colby. Culture Index to me is the best of the best. And then the third part, values, wiring, is the resume and experience. I feel like everyone jumps to resume and experience. that is so status quo. What about character, core values, and wiring? These two things are huge. And if you don't define the character and wiring of a role, and it's just all about experience, I think you can hurt your culture, because culture is made up of people.
One of my first bosses told me when I was very young that what we do here, and he was talking about public relations at the time, for an NFL team, he said, "Morgan, this is not rocket science." And I realized then that any of the skill sets that we employ throughout our jobs, they're teachable. But you can't teach culture, you can't teach character. You have to model it yourself. And so for me, I think it's really important. The consistency is really important for me. I think if you're not modeling that character as a leader, then you can't expect that from your employees as well.
Okay, so you touched on it a little bit, but you obviously have been through some stuff in your careers, and you've come a long way, and you've leveled up every time. And it's really awesome to see the growth. How did you get there? I think, there are a lot of people in the room that, whether you're on a baseball team or you are, part of a company, or you're leading a classroom, or even you're a student in a classroom, how did you get where you are? What can they learn from you today, and the traits that took you where you are today?
It's a great question, and as I think about it, there's so many things that I've learned across my career, and there's so much more that I have to learn. But I always tell my team that I don't come down from the mountaintop with the tablets on how to do something. I don't. So I hire people who are a lot smarter than me. I've got 26-year-olds who are a lot smarter than me, and again, I could be their mother. But I love that because it creates collaboration, and it really helps us understand the market as well. Versatility is really, really important. Gone are the days, unless you're in a profession as a doctor or someone that's very specific, surgical profession, medical profession, things like that, you've got to have the versatility to be able to understand how things work together. So what I love now is the ability, without tablets on how to create it, or figuring it out together, is how does communications, digital media, creative services, content, storytelling, how does that all work together? So the versatility for me really started a long time ago, and I remember walking around the Kansas City Chiefs organization, and I love the NFL, but there's some very, very traditional old school environments within the NFL, and I would do my job and relentlessly do my job and make sure that that was done and done to my best ability. And then in my spare time, I would walk down the hall and I would ask a question to the sponsorship department or the marketing department. What do you do and how can I help? And I think over time that created versatility because I sat and I listened. I genuinely wanted to know how they did their job. Part of it was because I was scared that I wasn't going to get a job later. And I wanted to know what they did and how they did it. And so I think the versatility for me was critical.
I love hearing Morgan talk about that because I can only imagine in some of the environments how hard cross-departmentalization is and collaboration, and what she's doing. I got to really hear more of her story last night is inspiring because for me as an entrepreneur, my last business, we had a corporate team of 50 people. It was a fitness business, Iron Tribe Fitness, and we grew it through franchising. And my one word of how I've gotten to where I'm at is failure. And I'm a baseball player, so 7 out of 10 times failing is good. So I just grew up that way. So I apply that in business. My investors sometimes are like, geez, Jim, I don't know if I really think your company's very bankable. But the reality is trying, failing, learning, figuring out as a team what we could have done better, trying again, and you're gonna have your successes. But when you have your successes, you enjoy them, you also debrief and learn what you could have done better even in those. And so, in my last business where I was going, I really, for the first time, understood what she said as far as getting people around me who are smarter and better than I am in certain specialties, because I really, before that, had always been a generalist. I wanted to have my hand in everything, right? Sales and leadership of the team and vision and operations and technology. And I just learned the hard way that you can't scale something and do something big that impacts a lot of people unless you have great people around you building that culture. So, but in one word, failure. I could share so many stories of mistakes that I've made that have helped me get to where I'm at today. And there'll be new mistakes this year that we'll learn from, and it will make us better, and we'll learn fast so we can continue to grow.
So I am getting the eyes from behind the stage, but let me ask this one question before we leave. This is the defining moment of the entire panel.
Oh, dear.
This is a tweetable moment. Any last takeaways for the crowd?
Any last takeaways from the crowd? I think it's just building off what Jim said. It's owning your weaknesses, owning your failures, and understanding that that's okay. It makes you human as a leader. It's a big takeaway for me.
Yeah, I think, just to stay with the topic today, really figure out how you can be most self-aware so that you can use it in every role of your life to be better. That should be your hunger. There are people who don't have the health we have today. There are people who don't have a lot of the other riches that we have today in this country. No matter where you come from, we are very wealthy beyond the rest of this world. If you've traveled, you've seen that. Embrace it and use every day to get better. And that means chase down self-awareness. Find out as a father, mother, son, daughter, business owner, whatever role you're in business, everything, friend, how can you be better? And if you chase that down, I think you'll realize that your relationships will grow and you'll leave a legacy that will live on well after you're gone.
One of the things that I think throughout the whole conversation that I take away is that your personal brand is not just about you. And it's, you got to give and serve as much as you possibly can in that brand. And I'm very thankful for you joining us today and sharing your stories with us. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.